suspension EUC or a EUC without suspension. What is the difference? Well, let me tell you more about it. Hi, and welcome to Wrong Way. I've been writing EUC since 5 years, and I started out with non-suspension EUCs. Since that time, a lot of things have changed, and I have amassed tens of thousands of kilometers both on a non-suspension EUC as well as on suspension EUCs, especially lately. So what are the key differences? In this video, I'm going to tell you about them in 4 categories. First up, price. Second up, weight. Third up, safety. And lastly, I'm going to conclude it with a all-in-all user experience. When is the case when I'm going to take a EUC without suspension, and when will I go out of my way and take a EUC with suspension? So first up, let's talk about the price. And as you might imagine, EUCs with suspension are a lot more expensive than EUCs without it. Especially also in the used market, there's plenty of EUCs that don't have suspension, and they are much cheaper, oftentimes 500, 1,000 euro cheaper than their suspension counterparts. Especially in the budget segment, you won't find any EUC, any new EUC below 2,000 euro. And that is quite a bit of money. But then again, at 2,000 euro, you can get plenty of EUCs that will get you around the city. They will be more comfortable than a scooter. They will be less hassle and smaller than a bicycle or an e-bike. Now, I won't go too much into the discussion of, exercise, blah, blah, blah. I have 3 bikes, so I know what I'm talking about. Usually, if I need to just go somewhere and do some stuff, I'll take the EUC. But you can still comment about that in the comment section below. But for example, this Kingsong 14D costs about, 700 euro and can already get you into the feeling of how you use an electric unicycle in the city. It has lighting, it has a small tire, which is of course not as comfortable as a suspension EUC, but it still does the job well. So if you want to have the most bang for your buck, especially when riding around the city, well, a non-suspension EUC will be always the more economically viable option. Next up, let's talk about weight. But I also need to fill you up. No, I don't want to do that. Or do I?
And just as you have planted your seed in the ground, I am going to plant my seed in you.
But I also need to fill you in on the nuances about weight on electric unicycles. So naturally, electric unicycles without suspension are a lot lighter. So therefore, it will be easier to just lift them up, shove them into a train, shove them into a car, just lift them by the handle, get upstairs, and you're done. There is no question that it is easier to carry a lighter EUC than a heavier EUC. Usually, a suspension EUC will be about 5 kilos heavier than its non-suspension counterpart. Now, this also depends on other criteria as the technology and materials used, but basically 5 kilos at least will be the difference. But where's the nuance? Well, hear me out. When you have a suspension EUC, you can also push it up the stairs. Now, this is a technique that requires a bit of practice, but you can literally just push the EUC from around the middle area of the case and it will sort of ride up the stairs. Now, as said, this requires a bit of technique, but this means that even with a heavy EUC, you can still tackle stairs quite easily. Not as easily as a light EUC, but still very doable. And then if you, for example, have a car and you need to lift the EUC into the car, you can just get a dog ramp. That's what I have, and my back is thanking me a lot. But to simply conclude it, there is no EUC with suspension that weighs below 20 kilograms currently out there on the market, while non-suspension EUCs can weigh 14 kilograms like this one, or the Kingsong 16X, which weighs about 23 kilograms and has way more battery than a suspension counterpart at the same weight. Now, safety is very important for me and probably for you too. So what are the main differences when it comes to safety when riding on a non-suspension EUC than a suspension EUC? Well, first up, let's start with the non-suspension EUC. And definitely this wheel requires a bit more practice to feel confident going around the city. The pedals are usually lower, so if you take a tight turn, you can clip this pedal against a relatively low curb and then you can fall. Or if you go really fast and suddenly you encounter some sort of big stone on the road, I mean really big, like this big, or a curb, it is way more probable to fall on this wheel than on this wheel. However, I still use it And I pretty much can't remember the last time I fell on the King Song 14D. So while it requires a bit more exercise, a bit more experience, this is still a lot more comfortable than an electric scooter, electric skateboard, or rollerblades, you name it, any sport with smaller wheels than 14 inches. Now, because non-suspension EUCs are a lot lighter than their suspension counterparts, this means if you do fall, it won't hurt you as much as this thing can do. Like, believe me, I fell in a bike park once and I would be all right if this thing wouldn't kick me right here into the leg. And this is painful, while this is still quite manageable. Now, when it comes to safety on suspension EUCs, they are a lot more forgiving when going off-road and when going around a city. Bigger curbs are not a problem for this device, and potholes are a lot easier to conquer than on a non-suspension EUC. With this one, I'm usually scanning the road a little bit ahead of myself just to be sure that I will not be in an uncomfortable position. But with the suspension EUC, you just glide over it basically. So the biggest upside is when you suddenly would have some sort of terrain that would lift you up into the air on a non-suspension EUC. With this one, the suspension will just absorb the impact. In this scenario, and especially off-road, you need suspension. If you want to be an off-road rider with a lot of comfort and less falls, you can do it on a non-suspension EUC, but you will feel a lot better when you do have this suspension. But the nuance is the pedals are higher, they will kick you higher into the shin, and because they're heavier, they might actually bruise you a lot harder than a lighter EUC. So there you need to find out what is that you value more. So what's the user experience on both of these products? And this time, let me start with the suspension EUC. Now, suspension EUCs require a little bit more maintenance than their non-suspension counterparts. You have these bolts here that you need to check every once in a while. Depending on your suspension, if you have air suspension, you need to pump it up, and there might be leaks building up over time, so then you need to change modules. And let me tell you, working on such a more complicated device than this is a lot more hassle than just taking this apart. If I want to change a tire, for example, on this wheel, I don't even want to attempt to do it before the tire here is gone. Maybe I'll do it because I make reviews. I need to, test different tire options. But with this, I'm hesitating for a long time until I do something about it. Whilst with the small, simple wheel, the King Song 14D, I can change a tire basically in an hour. So this is a lot simpler to work on than this. More parts can get used up because of the mechanism, the slider mechanism, all of the seals there, all of the parts. It just requires a bit more attention, a bit more maintenance, more parts, and more complex sort of fixing just to deal with it over a longer time span. Now, because they're heavier and they have their pedals also higher up, it is also tougher to learn on a suspension EUC. Typically, if I want to teach someone how to ride, I'll take this instead of this. Another thing is that suspension EUCs are usually newer than their non-suspension counterparts. Now, Bigode is pretty much the only manufacturer that still keeps improving and making new models of smaller wheels, and that's why I will test the Bigode M10.5 and the Bigode Falcon in the near future, which are also available at my partner oneride.eu. Make sure to use coupon code WRONGWAY if you want to buy anything there. So looking at all of the other companies, basically InMotion and King Song, their wheels are slightly outdated compared to their suspension counterparts. What that means is that some qualities of life, like better lighting, more robust axles, better tech, general improvements of the chassis and construction will be just not available in those non-suspension electric unicycles. So when will I take a suspension wheel out for a ride? Well, definitely for all of the group rides, all of the off-road performance-oriented riding, I will still choose an electric unicycle with suspension because it saves my knees, it's a lot more comfortable, and I will feel safer on all kinds of surfaces. However, especially the bigger, newer EUCs look a bit more intimidating. So if you're going into a restaurant, if you're going into a store, you can get a bit more looks. And sometimes even restaurants or store owners might hesitate to let you in because this looks like an electric motorcycle. whilst non-suspension EUCs are always smaller, narrower. So when will I use a EUC without suspension? Well, the Kingsong 14D I primarily use to get around, 5 to 10 kilometers around my area. It also has a very limited battery and motor, so I don't do more errands on it, but I could if I would have a slightly bigger EUC without suspension, like the upcoming M10.5, or maybe even like a Kingsong 18L. I used to love that wheel so much. It's so light to ride on, it's so maneuverable, it's a lot easier to brake, accelerate and turn on a lighter non-suspension EUC. I will use it to teach people how to ride. I will use it when I need to get places where I need to just lift the EUC, or I know that I will not go far. However, most of the time I will take the charger with me as well. Not a biggie, it's very small, but this is the trade-off when you have a small non-suspension EUC. When doing tricks like shove-its, doing spins, some flat ground tricks, it is infinitely more comfortable to do them on EUCs that don't have suspension. Going backwards, training tight turns, doing spins, and I really miss the feeling of having a EUC with 1,000 or 1,500 watt-hours without suspension, because then it's just so much more fun to lift them up, to take them somewhere, and they are just a lot more human-sized than suspension EUCs. Now with that said, I would be complaining a lot if I need to go through cobblestone on them, if I would need to do off-road in any sort of faster speed. I can still do them in walking pace just because I don't want to hit my pedal, but it's a lot less fun than on this. So with that said, this is my take on suspension versus non-suspension EUCs. What do you ride? Tell me in the comments, what do you enjoy about your type of vehicle and what are the biggest upsides and downsides of riding this or this. So with that said, if you're still here, leave a like on the video. I hope you like this video format, and I'll see you in the next one. No, what do I say usually? And I'll see you in the next video. See you soon.